I was a successful software engineer who had always taken pride in supporting my parents financially. For years, I covered their mortgage, paid for medical bills, and even funded a complete renovation of their home. I thought I was doing the right thing, being the dutiful son. Then one Thanksgiving, I accidentally saw a text on my father's phone that shattered everything. He called me a freeloader to our relatives, claiming I used money to control them. If you've ever felt betrayed by family after sacrificing everything for them, let me know where you're watching from. Hit like and subscribe as I share how I discovered the painful truth about what my parents really thought of me. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in Minnesota, my life seemed pretty normal on the surface. My father, Franklin, worked at a local manufacturing plant, while my mother, Dorothy, served as a secretary at the elementary school I attended. They weren't wealthy by any means, but they managed to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. Our house was modest compared to some of my friends' homes, but it was comfortable enough. My relationship with my parents was what I would call loving but complicated. They always had high expectations for me, which sometimes felt impossible to meet. When I brought home an A-, the question was always why it wasn't an A+. When I won second place in the science fair, they wondered why I hadn't taken first. I understood they wanted the best for me, but their constant pushing often left me feeling like I was never quite good enough. "Brendan, you have potential," my father would say, "but potential without effort is worthless." This became something of a mantra in our household. I heard it when I wanted to play video games instead of studying, when I spent too much time with friends, or whenever I showed interest in anything they deemed unproductive. Despite their critical nature, I never doubted they loved me. They attended every school event, stayed up, helping with projects, and talked proudly about me to their friends. It was a complicated dynamic that I accepted as normal for many years. Computers captured my interest early on. While other kids were playing sports, I was taking apart old computers and learning how to program. I saved every dollar from mowing lawns and shoveling snow to buy components for my first custom-built PC. My parents didn't really understand my passion, but didn't discourage it either, especially once they realized it might lead to a stable career. Throughout high school, I juggled academics with part-time jobs at the local grocery store and then at a computer repair shop. The money I earned went straight into better equipment and programming books. My parents approved of my work ethic, but constantly reminded me that these jobs should never interfere with my grades. When college application time came around, I earned a partial scholarship to the state university for computer science. It wasn't the full ride my parents had hoped for, but it was enough to make college feasible with student loans and continued work. They congratulated me, but also reminded me that many of my classmates had received better scholarships. College was a grind of classes, studying, and working. While other students enjoyed the full college experience, I spent weekends and evenings at an IT help desk job. During summers, I secured internships at local tech companies, building my resume and skills. The hard work paid off when in my senior year I landed an interview with a prestigious tech company in Seattle. The job offer came with a salary that seemed astronomical to me at the time. When I called my parents with the news, my mother cried with joy, and my father, in a rare moment of unbridled pride, told me, "You did it, son. You really did it." That validation meant everything to me. As I settled into my new life in Seattle, my parents faced their own challenges back in Minnesota. The manufacturing plant where my father had worked for over 30 years announced layoffs. At 58, with specialized skills in a dying industry, he found himself unemployed with dim prospects for finding comparable work. Around the same time, my mother began experiencing severe joint pain. The diagnosis was rheumatoid arthritis, requiring ongoing treatment and expensive medication. Their health insurance, tied to my father's employment, was set to expire, leaving them vulnerable to mounting medical costs. Their retirement savings, which had taken a hit during the economic downturn, was nowhere near enough to sustain them. The house, which they had been paying on for decades, needed critical repairs they could no longer afford. The roof leaked, the furnace was failing, and the electrical system needed updating to meet code requirements. Despite these mounting problems, my parents were reluctant to ask for help. Instead, they dropped hints during our weekly calls. "The furnace made a strange noise last night," my mother would say. "Your father thinks we can get through one more winter with it." Or my father would mention casually, "The doctor wants your mother to try this new medication, but the insurance is giving us trouble about covering it." I recognized these comments for what they were: their way of letting me know they were struggling without directly asking for assistance. Pride was always a strong trait in both of them. My first offer of help was small, paying for my mother's medication that insurance wouldn't cover. They resisted initially, but eventually accepted when I framed it as a temporary solution, until they sorted things out with insurance. But there was no sorting out to be done. Their financial situation was dire. As my career advanced and my salary increased, I gradually took on more of their expenses. When their health insurance lapsed, I added them to my company's plan as dependents. When they mentioned the roof was leaking, I didn't just offer to help with repairs. I paid for a complete roof replacement. The breaking point came when my father admitted they were 3 months behind on their mortgage and the bank was threatening foreclosure. Without telling them, I contacted the bank and not only caught up their payments but arranged to take over the mortgage entirely. When I presented this solution to them, my father's eyes welled with tears. "We never wanted to be a burden to you," he said. "You're not a burden, Dad. You're my parents. You took care of me my whole life. Now it's my turn to help." What started as temporary assistance evolved into comprehensive financial support. I paid their property taxes, utility bills, and medical expenses. When their furnace finally died in the middle of a Minnesota winter, I didn't just replace it. I funded a complete renovation of their aging home, insisting they pick out every fixture and finish to make it exactly what they wanted. By my calculations, I was sending them nearly 30% of my income every month. It meant delaying some of my own goals, the condo I wanted to buy, the trips I wanted to take, but seeing their relief and gratitude made it worthwhile. Or so I thought. Thanksgiving had always been my favorite holiday. The combination of good food, family time, and the absence of gift-giving pressure made it feel more genuine than other celebrations. That year, I flew back to Minnesota, looking forward to spending time in the newly renovated house I had helped create for my parents. The first day went smoothly. My mother and I prepared the turkey and sides, while my father watched football and occasionally wandered into the kitchen to sample whatever was available. The house looked beautiful with the new hardwood floors, updated kitchen, and modern furnishings they had selected. Seeing them comfortable in their improved home gave me a sense of satisfaction. On Thanksgiving Day, while my mother was resting before dinner, I was finishing up the sweet potato casserole. I needed a recipe for the marshmallow topping, but had left my phone charging in the guest room. "Dad, can I borrow your phone for a second? I need to look up a recipe," I called to him from the kitchen. "Sure, it's on the coffee table," he replied, not looking away from the football game. I grabbed his phone and opened the browser. As I typed in my search, a notification popped up at the top of the screen. It was a text from my Uncle Jerry. "Franklin, did you tell the freeloader about the cruise?" Yet the word freeloader caught my eye. I knew my parents had mentioned wanting to take a cruise next spring, and I had already told them I would help pay for it as a 40th anniversary gift. But why would Uncle Jerry refer to me that way? Before I could stop myself, I tapped on the notification opening their conversation. What I saw made my stomach drop. Scrolling up through the message thread, I saw my name mentioned repeatedly in conversations, not just with Uncle Jerry, but in a group chat that included several family members. "Brendan's coming for Thanksgiving again," my father had written just 3 days earlier, probably to remind us how much we owe him. Uncle Jerry had responded, "Does he still throw his money in your face?" My father's reply felt like a physical blow. "Always. Acts like we're his charity case." Real freeloader mentality, thinks paying for things, buys him the right to control our lives. I kept scrolling in disbelief, seeing message after message where my parents complained about me to our extended family. My mother had written, "He's impossible lately. Questions every decision we make like we're children." There were texts joking about hiding purchases from me, comments about how they had to perform gratitude to keep the money flowing, and worst of all, a conversation about the home renovation where my father claimed I had forced my preferences on them, when in reality I had insisted they choose everything themselves. My hands were shaking as I put the phone down. I felt physically ill, like someone had punched me in the stomach. The sweet potato casserole sat forgotten on the counter as I tried to process what I had just read. For years, I had been sacrificing my own financial goals to support them, and all along they had been mocking me behind my back, painting me as controlling and condescending. Somehow I managed to finish the dinner preparations. My mind raced as I moved around the kitchen on autopilot. Should I confront them immediately? Wait until after dinner? Pretend I had seen nothing? And reevaluate our relationship later? The thought of sitting through a meal, celebrating gratitude, while this knowledge burned inside me seemed impossible. Thanksgiving dinner was a tense affair. My parents noticed my sudden shift in mood but attributed it to travel fatigue. I picked at my food, barely tasting anything, nodding mechanically when they spoke. Every expression of thanks now seemed suspect. When my father raised a toast to family and generosity, I nearly choked on my water. After dinner, as we sat in the living room with coffee and pie, I could no longer contain myself. I pulled out my father's phone and placed it on the coffee table between us. I saw the messages. I said simply, about me being a freeloader, about how I try to control you with money. The color drained from both their faces. My mother's hand flew to her mouth while my father's expression hardened defensively. You had no right to read my private messages, he said, reaching for the phone. I wasn't snooping. The notification popped up when I was looking for a recipe. But that's hardly the point, is it? Is that really what you think of me? After everything I've done, my mother jumped in her voice, placating. Brendan, honey, you weren't supposed to see that. Your father was just venting. It doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean anything. You've been talking about me like this to the entire family. For how long? The silence that followed answered my question. This wasn't a one-time venting session. This was how they regularly portrayed me to others. My father leaned forward. Look, you have to understand. When you started helping us financially, things changed between us. Suddenly you had opinions about everything. What car we should drive, what doctors we should see, how we should renovate the house. I made suggestions, because I care about you, and you always had the final say. Did we? My mother asked quietly. When your father wanted to keep his old truck, you insisted on buying him a new one because it was safer. When I mentioned joining a painting class, you immediately offered to pay for it, making me feel like I needed your permission to have a hobby. I was stunned. I was trying to help, to make your lives better and easier. We know that my father said, his tone softening slightly. But with every check came the feeling that we were losing our independence, that we were becoming children to our own child. I spent that night alone in the guest bedroom, staring at the ceiling and replaying years of interactions in my mind. Had I really been controlling with my financial help, I had never attached explicit conditions to the money I gave them, but had I implied expectations, I thought about specific instances they had mentioned. The truck, yes, I had pushed for that, but my father's old pickup was literally falling apart and unsafe. The painting class, I had enthusiastically offered to pay because my mother had always loved art, but never pursued it due to cost. Were these acts of control or acts of love? Then I calculated the financial support I had provided over the years. The mortgage payments alone totaled over $100,000. Add in medical expenses, utilities, property taxes, home repairs, and the renovation, and the figure exceeded $175,000. Money I could have invested, used for a down payment on my own home, or saved for my future. Money wasn't the point, of course. I would have gladly given twice that amount if I had felt it was appreciated rather than resented. The betrayal wasn't about dollars. It was about discovering that the gratitude they had shown to my face turned to resentment and mockery behind my back. The next morning, we continued our conversation over coffee. The night apart had not cooled tensions. If anything, it had allowed resentments to crystallize. I need to understand, I said. When did you start seeing me as some controlling freeloader rather than a son who is trying to help? My father sighed. It wasn't one moment. It was gradual. At first, we were just grateful. But over time, the balance shifted. Do you know how it feels to be indebted to your child, to know you can never repay what you owe? I never asked to be repaid. That was never the point. Maybe not consciously, my mother interjected. But Brendan, you changed too. Every time you visited, you would inspect the house, asking about maintenance issues, suggesting improvements. You started questioning our medical decisions, our spending habits. Because I cared, because I wanted to make sure you were okay, or because you wanted to protect your investment, my father challenged. You helped us financially, but it came with the unspoken expectation that we would make decisions you approved of. Their words stung because there was perhaps a grain of truth in them. I had become more involved in their lives as my financial support increased, but their interpretation of my motives was completely wrong. And what about the things you said to the family? Joking about hiding purchases from me, calling me a freeloader when I'm literally paying your bills. My mother had the grace to look ashamed, but my father doubled down. You show up here in your expensive clothes with your fancy job acting like some savior. You think we don't see how it makes you feel superior. Your sister helps us too, you know. She sends what she can, but she never makes us feel like we owe her. This was news to me. Tracy helps you financially. Not as much as you, my mother admitted. She can't afford to, but she helps in other ways, and she does it without conditions. The conversation spiraled from there. Every grievance, every perceived slight on both sides came pouring out. I learned they had told family members I had forced them to renovate the house my way, when in reality, I had insisted they make all design choices. They revealed they resented how I questioned their decision to maintain two cars when they could barely afford one. They even complained about how I had taken over their medical care by finding them better doctors and paying for treatments. The breaking point came when my father made a statement that cut through all the noise. We would have managed fine without your interference. I stared at him in disbelief. Managed fine. You were 3 months from foreclosure. Mom's medication costs more than your monthly Social Security. The roof was literally caving in. We would have figured something out, he insisted stubbornly. We always did before you started throwing your money around. In that moment, I realized a fundamental truth. They did not want my help, at least not on the scale I had been providing it. More importantly, they did not see my financial support as an act of love, but as an unwelcome intrusion that threatened their sense of independence and dignity. I stood up from the table. I need to pack. I'm going back to Seattle today, instead of Sunday. Brendan, don't be dramatic, my mother pleaded. We can work this out. But I was already heading to the guest room, my mind made up. Within an hour, I had packed my bags and called a rideshare to take me to the airport. My parents stood in the doorway looking shocked at this turn of events. So that's it, my father asked. You're just leaving because we were honest about how we feel. No, I replied calmly. I'm leaving because I finally understand how you feel. You don't want my help. You resent it. And you've been mocking me to our entire family while cashing my checks. So yes, I'm leaving. The drive to the airport gave me time to think. By the time I boarded my flight back to Seattle, I had made a decision. The following week, I consulted with a financial advisor about legally ending my financial support in a way that wouldn't leave them destitute but would extricate me from their financial lives. I drafted a formal letter explaining that I would finish paying for my mother's current round of treatments and cover the mortgage through the end of the year, giving them 3 months to make alternative arrangements. After that, my financial support would end completely. Their reaction was panic. My phone filled with voicemails and texts, first angry, then pleading. I responded to none of them. When my sister called to berate me for abandoning our parents, I calmly explained what had happened and why I had made my decision. Her tune changed quickly when she realized she might need to increase her own contributions. The weeks following my decision were some of the hardest of my life. Despite the hurt they had caused me, these were still my parents, and breaking ties with them felt like cutting off a part of myself. I experienced waves of guilt, questioning whether I had overreacted. There were nights I nearly called them to say I had changed my mind. What stopped me was remembering the messages, the mockery, and most of all the fundamental misunderstanding of my intentions. They had interpreted my generosity as control, my concern as condescension. No amount of money could bridge that kind of disconnect. The extended family quickly took sides. Some relatives, like Uncle Jerry, who had been part of the group chat mocking me, suddenly reached out with awkward attempts at reconciliation, undoubtedly concerned about losing access to my financial assistance by proxy. Others, who had always seen my support of my parents in a positive light, offered genuine sympathy and support. My cousin Amanda called me a few weeks after Thanksgiving. I always thought what you did for Uncle Franklin and Aunt Dorothy was amazing, she said. I never heard them say anything but good things about you to my face, which makes what they said behind your back even worse. You did the right thing, Brendan. That validation helped, but the emotional toll remained. I started seeing a therapist to process the feelings of betrayal and loss. She helped me understand that my parents' reaction said more about their issues with dependency and pride than about my actions or intentions. It's common for parents to struggle with receiving help from their children, she explained. It reverses the natural order they're accustomed to. Some handle it with grace, others with resentment. Their response doesn't negate the generosity of what you did. Physically, the stress manifested in insomnia and a loss of appetite. I threw myself into work as a distraction, taking on extra projects and working late hours. It wasn't healthy, but it was better than sitting alone in my apartment ruminating on what had happened. Gradually, I began to build a support system that had nothing to do with blood relations. Friends became my chosen family. Jake and Mia, a couple who lived in my building, started inviting me for weekly dinners. My colleague Tanner, sensing something was wrong, would check in regularly and eventually became a close friend. Through my therapist, I connected with a support group for adults experiencing family estrangement. Hearing others' stories helped me realize I wasn't alone, and that establishing boundaries, even painful ones, was sometimes necessary for self-preservation. With the money I was no longer sending to my parents, I established a scholarship fund for underprivileged students interested in computer science. I also began mentoring at a local community center, teaching coding to teenagers who reminded me of myself at that age, passionate about technology but lacking resources. These new connections and contributions didn't replace family, but they gave me purpose and helped heal the wound of betrayal. I was creating positive impact without the complications that had arisen with my parents. About 4 months after Thanksgiving, I received a letter from my parents. Unlike their earlier messages, which had focused on their financial predicament, this one acknowledged the hurt they had caused. "We've had time to reflect on our behavior," they wrote. "The things we said about you were wrong and ungrateful. We convinced ourselves you were trying to control us because it was easier than admitting we needed help. Our pride made us resent the very thing we should have been most thankful for, having a son who cared enough to support us. We understand why you stepped away and we don't blame you. We just want you to know we're sorry." I didn't respond immediately. Part of me suspected this change of heart was motivated by their financial struggles without my support. But over the following weeks, more letters came, not asking for anything, just sharing updates about their lives and expressing regret for the past. After 6 months of silence, I agreed to meet them at a restaurant halfway between Seattle and Minnesota. The reunion was awkward but necessary. They looked older, more tired than when I had last seen them, but there was a humility in their demeanor that had not been there before. "We've downsized," my father explained. "Sold the house, moved to a smaller place. It's been an adjustment, but it's manageable on our income. And I'm back working part-time at the school," my mother added. "Just administrative work, nothing strenuous. The new medication is helping with the arthritis. We established ground rules for moving forward. Any relationship we rebuilt would not include financial dependence. They would need to live within their means, and I would not be their safety net." They agreed, seemingly relieved to have any relationship at all. The rebuilding process was slow. We started with monthly phone calls, then occasional visits, always on neutral ground, never with me paying for everything. When they needed help with something specific, like navigating Medicare options or researching treatments, I provided information rather than money. The most surprising change was in how they related to me as a person, not just a provider. My father began asking genuine questions about my work, trying to understand what I actually did rather than just knowing I made good money doing it. My mother shared her painting progress without hints about class fees or art supplies. These small shifts indicated they were beginning to see me, really see me, perhaps for the first time in years. Not as an ATM, not as a controlling presence, but as their son who had his own life goals and needs. The experience transformed how I approach all relationships. I became more mindful of the potential complications that come with financial support. I learned to distinguish between helping someone and trying to fix their problems for them. Most importantly, I recognized that true generosity comes without strings attached, but also without allowing yourself to be taken for granted. This painful chapter taught me that family bonds, while important, are not sacrosanct if they become toxic or one-sided. Sometimes the healthiest love you can show someone is stepping back and allowing them to face the consequences of their actions and attitudes. And sometimes the most important respect you can show is to yourself by refusing to be devalued or exploited, even by those who raised you. The journey from hurt to healing wasn't straightforward. There were setbacks and moments of doubt. But ultimately, I found a balance between compassion for my parents and compassion for myself. I forgave them not to free them from guilt, but to free myself from resentment. And I established boundaries not to punish them, but to create space for a healthier relationship to potentially grow. Have you ever had to step back from family relationships to preserve your own well-being? What boundaries have you set with loved ones who took your generosity for granted? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences about navigating complex family dynamics. Remember, sometimes the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and others, is to stop enabling patterns that hurt everyone involved. Thank you for listening, and I wish you strength in your own journey toward healthy relationships built on mutual respect.